Learn the difference between an object literal and a parsed JSON string. Here is my boilerplate code, and here we want to look at the difference between the a JSON string and object literal. In a real world, data usually comes from a database as a plain text string that is wrapped in quotes. But in this example, we want to show the normal workflow whereby we start with a raw text string, then we'll run through it, pass it, and then transform it into a functional JavaScript object that our web page can read. So let's take a look at the example. So let's move into the script section inside this code. And the first thing I want to do is I want to add a variable. So it could be anything, but let's use my JSON as an example. For this variable, you can see that it has a name, age, and city. And I also want to add one more value, which is car equals to none. Now, looking at this object, a live JavaScript object that usually have key value pairs always comes with the values being in quotes. But looking at this example, you can see that both the key and the values are being put inside double quotes. And the purpose is just to make this, is just to make this comply with a valid JSON or a JSON string in JavaScript. So now that we have this variable, then since we are not trying to access the property directly, let's pass this variable before we can then try to work with its children. So what am I saying in essence? If I go ahead now and do something like this, document dot get element by ID of demo dot inner dot html. Now you can see that my variable is being printed on the screen. But now let's say I want to get something out. Let's say I want to get a name. Now you can see that the result is undefined, and that is because as it is currently, JavaScript does not really understand what to do with the property that I'm trying to access from this my JSON variable. So before I can do this, I first need to pass what I have here. And how do I do that? Well, I need another method called JSON pass, which is going to receive my variable, that is my object, as an argument. So let me go ahead and make that variable. So let me call it my obj, and then I'll call it the method JSON.pass, and then I'll pass in my JSON. And now that I have done this now, if I now come down here and do my obj.name, now this should work. And now you can see job. So I want another variable, maybe city. This also should work. Now, what do you think is going to happen if I try to access car? Now, you can see that nothing is displayed, and that is because in JavaScript, not simply represent an empty or no value. Let's check console. Oh, there's nothing inside console. Because now represents an empty value or no value, it is safe to assume that nothing is going to be printed on the screen and no error is going to be displayed in the console, as we just find out in the console that there's no error there. But if I try to access any property that has a value, then definitely it will always come out and display on the screen. So this example shows that our script starts with a plain text string that is enclosed in single quotes or double. Our own is enclosed in single quotes. And what do I mean by that? If you look at the outside of these curly braces, you can see this single quote that is outside. So this is what makes this a plain text string. And then you now make use of the JSON pass method to turn this text into a real object. And why do we need to pass it? That is because in JavaScript, every JSON string needs to be converted into an object before you can access the property of such string. And that's exactly what we did here. So once we were able to pass it and turn that text into a real object, then we're able to read the name property to display John, either John, the age, or the city on the screen. So let's quickly take a look at our code breakdown. So we have this variable, notice the single quote outside. So it is not yet an object. It is 100% plain text with the introduction of this single quote that is outside it. And then this part takes the raw text, that is this JSON string that we have here, and convert it into a live interactive JavaScript object using this JSON.pass method. And then we're able to use the my object.name to access or grab the text that is contained inside of the age property of our live object. So here is how we can convert from a JSON string into an object literal in JavaScript, and then use the dot notation to access the property of such object. Here are a few key takeaways from this lesson. Number one, if it is wrapped in a single quote like this, it is a string payload. So if it starts directly with a curly braces, then it is an object literal. So for this particular case scenario, this is a plain text string because it starts with a single quote and not a curly braces. Number two, while object literals are great for local code configuration, passive text string is the standard way your app handles external data. So when you have external data, you definitely want to use the pass method to handle external data in your code, just as we did with this plain text string in this example.